How does one describe this episode? My word would be weird. This was weird.
I have so many questions. So many.
This was the zoo. What an episode title. Steven finds Greg again, and they have their heartwarming reunion. But Greg has met some people who were born in the zoo. After some introductions and some discussions of how to escape, their earrings begin to talk to them. The voice from it tells all the humans when to eat, bathe, and sleep, among other things, and it is all very, very weird. It is a very weird day in a very weird pseudo-utopia. But before Greg falls asleep, Steven reminds them that they have to escape. They very quickly find the door to exit the zoo, but when the two humans they met earlier meet them there, they only know of rumors and stories about a door. So they only know this walled-in place. At the same time, conveniently, it ends up being time for the choosing, and they end up going to a circle in the middle of the place. In this circle, two of the zoo residents are... That's what I call them. Zoo residents. It's absurd no matter what. Anyway, they're told to enter so that they can essentially be a couple. When Greg is called up, he rejects it, as people chose who they want to be with on Earth instead of being chosen for them. Everyone quickly likes this idea, so they all decide to choose Greg. But when Greg rejects all of them, they all burst into tears and run after him and Steven. The Amethysts run in to stop the chaos, but before Greg and Steven can leave, they're caught by them. And that's how the episode ends. So I have one big disappointment about this episode, is that we didn't get the best ending. The Greg harem ending.
This is really interesting in how it depicts what has become of human society under 5,000 years of massively technically advanced cultivation, basically, by a more advanced race.
Yes.
I have so many questions about how this cultivated society works. I think it's interesting you use the term utopia, because in a literary sense the term utopia refers to the illusion of a perfect place, but isn't really perfect. Like, generally in a literary sense, utopia and dystopia refer to the same place, but it's just two different aspects of the place. And in fact, the dystopia is more extreme the more perfect the utopia on top of it appears. And, this is all about Twilight Zone. all the Zoomans, as Steven refers to them at some point, are completely happy. They're not aware of suffering in any way. Like, it freaks them out when they feel heartbreak when Greg rejects them all, because they've never felt rejection or sadness before.
Yes.
And the thing is, this is one that's always a bit complicated to try and, like, the idea that someone's lived life entirely without suffering. I mean, part of it is also these people do not have free will, or quite possibly haven't even developed higher conscious thought, because their every thought from the minute they're born is controlled by, the HAL voice in their earrings.
Yeah.
So they haven't developed critical thinking, they haven't developed creative thinking. It is entirely possible to abuse people and manipulate people into losing these kind of higher thought processes, and this has been going on for 5,000 years. So, this is generations of people without creative or critical thought in any form.
Yeah.
And so, Steven wants to get them all out of there and take them back to Earth. I don't think any of these people would be capable in any way of integrating with human society, and quite possibly wouldn't be capable of living without direction at all for the entire rest of their lives. There's also, there's a lot of other questions, like, we only see a small number of people, and I'm thinking that doesn't look like a viable gene pool for several thousand years.
Yeah.
Either the population has massively dwindled, or what I think is potentially more likely is simply that we're only seeing a small part of the zoo, which is entirely populated by unchosen young adults. And when they get chosen and paired off and sent away, then, they live in a different part of the zoo, and there's a different part which has, like, small children and families in it. There's a different part for elderly.
That might be true. There was something I just realized is, considering how it's a zoo, and it's called a zoo, I was expecting something for them to be more of, like, an exhibit in some way. But that really wasn't it. Like, they seemed kind of just ignored by everything. There wasn't even like a one-sided window or anything. I
mean, I presume the gyms have a way to observe and monitor them at all times.
But I meant for enjoyment.
To be fair, the implication is that a Holly Agate's implication anyway is that no one really cares that much except Pink Diamond and now Blue Diamond. So quite possibly no one is observing them for entertainment. They're just there because that was a Diamond's orders 5,000 years ago. Although when all the Zoomans are heartbroken, the Amethyst and Jasper soldiers that run in do seem to be actually counselling them and comforting them. So it's possible that just in their downtime, the Amethyst and Jaspers are just watching the Zoomans because, it's the only entertainment going. I mean, the other thought I had about the Choosing is that, it's a breeding program. Like most zoos have breeding programs to, maintain endangered species. And that does imply that, when they're told when they get suggested the notion of choosing whoever they want, they don't have any notions of sexuality, basically. Both men and women choosing Greg, and they don't have any notions of monogamy restraining that either. But the choosing does seem to entirely... Again, it's not 200% clear what the genders of any of the characters are, but if it's a breeding program, which is what is implied by the term zoo, you'd have to assume that it's pairing all of them up heterosexually for the purposes of producing children.
Yes, that's exactly what I assumed.
So, again, if none of these humans are ever given the chance to try and explore themselves as individuals or come up with individual identities other than what they're told, it's possible that they don't... See, I find it impossible for humans to exist in a way that there aren't, any way that there's people exist who aren't heterosexual, who aren't the gender that society says their genitals make them. For that matter, we don't see any disabled people in this area. We don't, arguably all these people have been induced with mental disabilities, but we don't see any overtly physically or more extremely mentally disabled people. Are they being kept in a different part of the zoo? Which, again, the implication is that there's a breeding program going on, and if they're being treated like animals that are being bred, even in our societies, disabled people are often discouraged from, having children. It's impossible for a society to exist without disabled people in it, so what's happening to them in the zoo?
The world may never know.
Probably not. I don't know if we're ever going to visit the zoo again, and it is only an 11-minute episode, so we're not going to see the full intricacies of it. There's a lot of very horrifying implications to this apparently idyllic existence, which, is the classic utopia dystopia setup. All the conventionally attractive young adults are making flower crowns and frolicking and eating brightly coloured fruit and never experiencing sadness, but there's a lot of implied suffering in making that existence possible.
Probably. Almost certainly. Though that isn't what I got out of this. What I got out of this is that this whole episode was just I don't even try to describe it. It was just so almost uncomfortable.
Like I said, it was a bit Twilight Zone-y. Or a bit Stepford Wives or something. Everybody's too happy and you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Although the other shoe has already dropped. They're all prisoners in an alien zoo.
Yeah.
So, and but surface level, it's, the horrors, things like, oh god, they don't have a concept of the cannonball. Greg has to invent the cannonball for them when they're swimming.
Yes.
At one point, Greg, when the earrings tell them to go to sleep, Greg is just like, sure, I'm tired from doing a whole lot of nothing, which I find very relatable. And, it is, again, it's very, very creepy that these people have been conditioned throughout their entire lives to be hungry when they're told to be hungry, and to fall asleep when they're told to fall asleep.
Yeah.
And it's, as sentient beings, they have the right to control their own lives, but the question is whether or not they're capable of them at this stage of their existence. Which they're probably not. If they're like I've suggested, there are probably children and infants elsewhere in the zoo. You could take them back to Earth and they'd be able to be raised to integrate with human society, but the adults just wouldn't. They kind of would have to be left in their creepy Eden.
Yeah. By the way, one of the interesting things I noticed about the episode is that the way they talked was a bit off from how everyone else talks. It was, I'm not even sure how to describe it. It was still all English, but at the same time, it just seemed very off.
And I think it's probably because they've all learned to speak from listening to the earrings.
Yes.
So they're speaking in that kind of computery way.
Yeah,
like,
kind of.
And they've got certain things like they can't get their tongues around the name Greg. They all call him Ga-reg.
Yeah, Ga-reg and
Stevan, yeah, because they're all used to, just the emphasis and the speech patterns of the possibly entirely computerized voice that controls their daily lives.
Yes.
Like, there might not even be a sentient gem on the other end of that, it's just a computer program.
Though there might be, because the computer at one point did in fact call him Ga-reg, when all the others are like code names, basically.
Yeah, so that also might just be a gem thing, honestly.
Yeah.
Or some difficulty with the computer just not processing the names Greg and Steven properly.
Yeah.
I think Greg had a lot of the best moments in this, honestly. Like I said, inventing the cannonball, sure I'm tired from doing a whole lot of nothing, and straight up refusing to punch Steven, which, so some...
But then Steven punches him and he just goes 10 feet back into a tree.
His super strength into a tree. I love that. Because, side note, on a rant that I'm not going to have, but I do not approve of physically disciplining children. It doesn't work. And I appreciate that Greg, who is very often held up in the series as an ideal parent, is completely horrified by the notion of ever laying hands on his kid, even when he's told to, for, we really need to do this to escape aliens reason.
Yes.
And then, it just leads to that funny shot of Steven very weakly slapping his dad because he doesn't want to, and then he tries, and then you remember, oh yeah, Steven has super strength. Also, he has that really heavily emotional bit where he nearly gets chosen, and he's just like, he doesn't want a new wife, he's still dealing with the loss of his last partner. He explains how people choosing each other on Earth. Again, it's one of the good ways that Steven Universe manages to communicate consent in very simple terms. That also, when everyone starts choosing Greg, he's explaining, just because you choose in me doesn't mean I have to choose in you.
Yeah.
And I don't choose in you, and you have to respect that. And then they all start crying, and Greg says, I haven't broken this many hearts since I had all my hair. So that just all goes fantastically, and they escape the creepy zoo.
Yes.
While still wearing all their hippie duds, and Greg still has his flower crown and everything, which I love.
When the two zoo humans are confused about what hurt is, I don't know what hurt is. Steven just said, I know what hurt is. And I wanted him to say, it's my whole existence.
Oh god, because it is. Oh. The fandom really knows what hurt is.
I know this. I know all about this.
Everyone involved in the show is very experienced with pain.
They should have done more jokes. They should have just done a bunch of jokes based on that. That would have been great. Like when they said they don't know what hurt is, Steve should have just been like, lucky. Contrast.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if we're ever going to return to the zoo again. I kind of wouldn't put it past Rebecca Sugar to bring us back in 4 seasons' time and reveal that something in it is tremendously... Actually, I feel like we are going to see the zoo again simply because of one other thing that we don't see in this episode, but I feel like we are going to be back here.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we're going to see more of the Zoomans at that time, and what, because we saw from the outside it's a pretty big fucking space building that they're in, so that tiny little meadow area cannot be all of it. So are we going to see more of it at some stage? Is Stevan and Ga-reg's presence going to have some massive effect on the Zoomans that is going to have changed everything by the time we come back? I don't know.
Yeah. One last thing, by the way, I kind of regret complaining about certain recent episodes about some of the crime scenes maybe starting to feel overdone. I feel like I was punished for complaining about that. This crime scene was terrifying. This was punishment to me. You
want crying, Slider? You want crying?
That was the creepiest thing. Just the fact that they just all burst into tears, don't know what's going on, and are chasing them. It is scary. It's legitimately scary.
Like I said, everything about the zoo is creepy to me, but that's because I'm a world-building nitpicker, and I'm reading a lot into the, classic utopia dystopia setup there. One more episode, and then I can say everything I have to say about this Stephen Nuke. There's so much I still can't say yet.
Like, this is my type of horror. Like, most horror things are, at best, are just kind of cool, but aren't actually scary to me. This whole thing is just terrifying.
It's things just being wrong.
Yes, and off.
Especially when it's trying to portray itself as something positive and happy, and it's just wrong.
Yeah, and I did love Greg's little line. There's always a catch to these utopias.
There is. The man knows his literary devices.
Yeah. By the way, I am really glad that the Steven Universe doesn't usually do, the annoying types of episode, so I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I am really glad this didn't somehow turn into a Greg doesn't want to leave this utopia episode.
Part of me is like, oh god, tell me they're not doing that trope, tell me they're not doing that oh, thank god they're not, he's immediately leaving with Steven, because I forgot Greg Universe is one of the best characters in all of fiction. Greg Universe, #1 trope defier.
#1 dad, literally.
Best dad in the universe!
In the DeMeo.